I had my first meeting after that David Kahn meeting where he goes, you know, I'm not even sure I really want you to do A&R at Warner, and I don't like your band. I went to meet with Peter Standish, and he goes, oh, it looks like you guys were scheduled to release an album in August. I'm like, August? I haven't even started the record label. How are we going to go March? We don't have a record. And so it was a little disorganized.
Well, what happens is they have to put stuff in the schedule to get certain things moving. So even though they knew that they were going to move it, no one expected a record.
A couple times in the book, it comes up that they almost released Points of Authority as a single, and then they ended up changing to another song. There was a music video for Points of Authority later, like when they did Frat Party. It was like a bunch of live footage and stuff. Why did that end up not being a single when the video came out? Was it just too long after the record, or?
Well, there was a lot of drama around that song because I think it was a band favorite. It was a favorite of mine, still is one of my favorites on the album, but the label really wanted to go with the singles, and I'm sure Rob can speak to this as well, but the band wanted to have credibility, and that's what we went out with, you know, one step.
We all love Points of Authority. Like for all of us, like that was a powerful song, you know, and maybe this would be a great song, one step closer in our mind, but
and then Crawling in the radio department, that what in theory Crawling was the right song to take it into. The band was really concerned, which is a very valid concern, about keeping their core audience, which was rock, and that was extremely important. Rob kept representing that, and I agreed 100%. And the band did have songs that obviously crossed over and had these just great songwriting songs, like In the End, but leaned more pop. And Points of Authority was still edgy. The band was very concerned, at least what I remember, about not losing that core rock audience by going with In the End. And so we went with Crawling, which still was very aggressive, but was more focused on Chester, and that was a whole issue. Because Mike wasn't in that song as much, but Mike graciously was like, hey, let's do what's best for the record, and that was a great song, and that really exploded. Crawling.
You always want them to get their point across. You don't ever want them to feel like they're squashed. So every single time it was a single, it was like, no, we really want Points of Authority. We want to have our say about it, and we would have the discussion. And with Crawling, it was because there was a guy named Kevin Weatherly at K-Rock LA, and they're huge supporters, and they were the biggest alternative station at the time in the United States. He loved it. He was like, I don't care what you guys go with next, I'm playing Crawling, right? And that would be really messy. Right, if we were trying to work something else and he was going somewhere else, it would kill
momentum. Both songs. If you were working two songs at once and the biggest station
at that time, you couldn't do that.
It would kill it, and it would also piss off the radio station, which you don't want to do. K-Rock is the most important radio station.
So and I do feel bad because the band was getting really aggravated. They're like, when do we get what we want? And I'm like, you've got to put your say, but you've got to hear what they have to say. This is what they do for a living. And, you know, after they were right about, you know, it's funny because after they were right about Crawling, you know, for a long time, I do believe it was probably about 10 years or so, the band didn't question what song should be a single, right? That was really Mike Ripberg and all those guys, because they realized that they were right. And I said, listen, radio, you can't, and I said this even before we put out the record. Radio does what radio does. It's a bunch of guys that you don't even know dictating what your future's going to be, right? At different stations around it. All we can do is focus on the fans. Let's get the music out. Let's focus on the fans. Radio, you may not even get radio. Radio may die after a few weeks. We don't know what's going to happen with radio. So let's ignore that. And let's, every single time we do it. And then once it starts shifting, everyone's like, Crawling's not heavy. It's not that. I'm like, well, then let's double down. We're a rock band, right? Let's make sure then that our samplers and what we're putting on the street is the other side of the band. Let's make sure that all the heavy vibes, let's make sure that we're going with this. Let's make sure that we're only talking about the songs that matter to us and the fans, because that's the fun stuff, right? We can't control what's going to happen at radio. We can't control what's going to happen at international, right? These are guys that are dictating your future that you don't know. We can tell them what we want, but we have to, when they give us a scenario, we have to sit and figure out what makes it work for us the best. Like I would not allow poppy stuff to happen. You know, even when In the End went to let's say top 40 radio, right?
Mm-hmm.
It became a #1 top 40 song,
Right.
right? It was because the band had already built this base and the research was so huge that it exploded on its own. Usually you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, to get a song pushing at top 40 radio. Warner really spent almost nothing, if even
it just
anything,
took a
at
lot
top
of
40.
money. Yeah.
And so we then had to double down on being a rock band. There was a point where Phil Corderero had left the company and this guy, Tom Wally, had come in.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down with Tom and a bunch of other people and Dear McQueen and this guy, Jeff Aroff, and we sat down, and In the End was coming out. And I said, do me a favor, stop promoting the band. Just stop. It's a huge band. We're already like 5 million records in. I go, let it roll. We're about to do an arena tour. Let it go. This is a rock band. I do not, and Jeff references a story that I always kind of told everyone. I don't want you to abuse this band on their first record. We've got to have a long career. And that was my whole, I remember it. It's the one thing, if I can remember anything, I forget about it. I remember we have to focus on keeping this as real as they are.
That was huge. And
because they're real. They're a real band, but, other people can get in your way and misconstrue it and make it seem like, look at the crap that I think it was, the UK pulled on them. Oh, you're a manufacturer. Of course they weren't. Of course it was a load of crap. Whoever came up with that should be drawn and quartered. You know what I mean? But but it was one of those things that that was bothersome, because especially when you're as real as it gets.
Right.
You don't want that. But you have to really double down. When we were doing all the Southeast Asian stuff, I was like, the goal is this band has to be the biggest local international band that every country's ever had. Right? And by the way, that wasn't me faking something. That was just how we treated our fans, right?
Sure.
That was how you treat the fans. That's how you treat you guys, Everyone has to really kind of understand that the band really was in it. And then we figured out, then that's why LPU started the following year. We're like, all right, we've got this great group of people. How do we keep them excited and interested and keep feeding them cool stuff?
Mm-hmm.
That the people who just join later that don't really care as deeply as other people in the band, how do we keep them happy? How do we keep everyone fun?
And what's really cool too was that this band had some of the other bands didn't. You had 2 artists in there, and there were visionaries.
All artists, actually.
Yeah. I mean, but you've got these guys with this great visual eye, as artists. You got just visionaries, and they kept feeding different elements to the band. There was the art element, the sound element, the personalities. It was all a huge pot of amazing talent that went in that could continue to facilitate things. And it's just everything worked out amazing. But it all comes down to every individual functioning at 100% capacity.
Yeah. So speaking of all that time that they spent out on the road, how much time did you guys spend on the road with them? Because I know that, especially Jeff, like an A&R person's job might not necessarily be, you would think, touring centric, but especially in the early days, they didn't, I would assume, have that many people working for them. So were you kind of out on the road wearing a bunch of different hats, or?
I didn't. I mean, I would go out to see shows and check in and whatnot, but my primary goal was to make those records and discover them. I was working for the record label, discovering new talent, and I brought in several other big projects there, and so I went out to see quite a few shows and saw how amazing. I mean, it was unreal how they would, less than 7 months prior, they couldn't fill 6 or 7 kids in a room, and then they just have a sea of young people shouting and knowing every single word to their music. I mean, it was incredible.
Yeah,
so
that'd be amazing for you, right?
I remember I would have tears. I was always crying. I don't know what the hell. I'm an emotional person, but I got so emotional seeing these guys going I cannot believe the reaction, because that is the reaction I always had from every rehearsal. I would get chills. And after being told by endless amounts of people, this is career suicide, this band sucks, oh my God, you changed the name, it's still the same shitty band. I mean, it was rejection after rejection. To see that, I was always cheering up. So I'd love to go see them, and the crowds got bigger and bigger, and every single person knowing the lyrics was amazing. But I know Rob went out and did a much more touring, because my job was really at the record label.
Early on, you go to all the big event shows, right? If there's a big radio show, if it's a New York show, right? all the big eventized things. I didn't like going out on the road too much because I think that you needed to stay focused, and you can't when you're on the road as a manager, right? I'd rather be in the office fielding and making the calls and doing that. I spent a lot of time doing that. I mean, London, when we did that King's College show, stuff like that I was out there for.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, it wasn't until later when I kind of had to oversee one of the first like amphitheater Project Rev shows that I spent probably 3 weeks out on the road, and by the way, even during that time, because it's such a big thing, I wouldn't even interact with the band too much. You got to give them, the road's tough. The road's really hard on the band. You don't want to be, you want to be there just enough. You don't want to be in their face.
Yeah, same on the A&R level. I would go in there just enough. I would probably maybe once a month go out to see a show, maybe once every 3 weeks. And you also want to interact with the radio people out there. Make sure that those ties are good. So
I had to go out on a POD tour. Like I had to go out on a POD tour and fire a tour manager and replace him. So I did a couple of days. That's what managers do, right? You have to kind of, if you have to replace people. There was a joke for a while that whenever Rob came out on the road, someone was getting fired. Yeah.
And there was that
by
joke too.
the way, it's not fired because of that. It's because as a band like that, and I said this to the band early on, you're going to outgrow. You're just going to keep growing. As you keep growing, if you outgrow certain things, we've just got to keep moving. Mm-hmm. You got to change it, right? It's the natural evolution of the growth of a band.
For sure.